Our Global Future of Work practice was launched 3 years ago, and we followed suit a year later with our team focusing on future of work eminence, thought leadership, and developing asset-enabled solutions across the Africa continent. Fast forward to 2020, and we find ourselves at an inflection point. COVID-19 has fundamentally changed the way people view how work is done, where work is done, as well as the workplace. Our team has not been more busier than during these pandemic times, helping our clients navigate the environment of uncertainty and reshaping their organizations to align and pivot to a better normal. We have helped our clients across industries rethink their business models, shift focus from jobs to capabilities, helping them engage and create greater connection and collaboration among employees, and manage the mix of people as humans and technology capabilities in new and exciting ways. The future of work is here and it is now. And we are fueling this agenda to help our clients solve their most complex challenges through our multidisciplinary advisory services across the Deloitte Africa firm. And here we demonstrate that we understand the context and the unique challenges faced by our clients across industries within the continent. A great example of this is our A3 solution, Adapt, Adopt, Accelerate, which really shows our clients in a very real and practical manner how to solve their particular challenges that they are facing. And here to share more about this exciting offering is my colleague and partner who leads our future of work, John Brody. John, over to you.
It has been an interesting and exciting time to be working, and also very challenging and stressful at times. I think our A3, as Pam has introduced, very quickly we realized as a team that in the Future of Work team, that we are going to need a multidisciplinary approach to dealing with the different complexities and challenges that our clients were facing. As we've started to see the acceleration of the future of work and people having to adopt new technologies, they're having to adapt the way they work, adapt their business processes, adapt their models, and ultimately looking for opportunities to accelerate. We recognize that there are some real practical complexities and decisions and choices that they need to make. And so when we thought about how best to approach this, we pulled together a multidisciplinary team. And I think for me, that really does reflect a future of work driver around collaboration, multi-skilled teams. So the way we thought about the work we had to do and the jobs to be done was quite different to approaching this as this is a people or an HR issue, or this is a strategy issue, or this is a risk issue, or this is a real estate issue, or this is a people policy or a legal issue. We recognized that this response needed to be integrated and holistic in terms of starting to think through the possibilities, the challenges, and the opportunities that we are having to face in this new and shifting reality. When I was asked to pick up and look at the solution, and as a firm we'd recognized that this was not something that we're going to deal with by a different service offering or practice. It actually required a holistic and integrated approach by us as a firm to start solving very quickly the new challenges that our clients were facing, and really supporting in how do we make changes to enable us to move into this new future. Because as you've said, Pam, the future of work is not something that's in the future, we are living it now. And many of the barriers that we faced, or the difficulties we had in getting people aligned around choices and decisions, are now things that are having to be done quite quickly. So in assembling this multidisciplinary team, we actually started to understand what were the key areas and decisions that our clients needed to make, and how best could we work together to support them. And it's been a fascinating journey and a massive learning for us as a team as we've gone and engaged with clients. Because a lot of what we're facing, there is a level of uncertainty. We recognize that we're starting to move towards a hybrid reality. There's new changes that are coming in, but exactly where we land is not 100% sure. But we are starting to get a directional view. And I think for us, that's the key thing, is we need to, as leaders, across all our industries, across all our sectors, in our own disciplines, take a step back and think about those three components of our A3. What is it that we're going to have to adapt? Our business strategy, our processes, our policies. What are the new things that we're going to have to adopt in terms of technologies, policies, ways of working? And ultimately, what are the things that we want to accelerate to ensure we really are positioned, one, to have a sustainable business and organization, but two, to be prepared for what will exist in the next 2 to 3 years. And so now is the time that we need to start building and laying those foundations if we haven't done that. And as we go through the different conversations today in the panel, I think you'll start seeing that different clients, different industries are in different places. Some have been able to get there quicker, some are lagging, some have been able to do it really well in certain areas of their business or in the organization, others have struggled more. And that's kind of the picture. But for us, you put a future of work lens on everything that we do now. Because as we move into this fourth industrial revolution, we recognize that the work we do and the value we create as humans is going to be different. And so it's going to be quite critical for us to think about what is this work? How is work changing? How is the workforce changing in terms of who's going to deliver that work? And then ultimately the workplace, which has been the key point of disruption. This has been the accelerator. We got pushed out of the traditional workplace and into a new workplace, which forced us to adopt new things, to rethink our workforce and rethink our work. And so we've had a mixed experience. There have been areas where we've seen increases in productivity. We've seen obviously massive disruption in certain areas where potentially continuity has not been so easy when we've had a mixed, particularly when we got to hard lockdown. We've had to have people on site, so there's been challenges in that. As we went into lockdown, many of our clients recognized that some were able to continue working, some were able to move their work off-site, but we've had a mixed bag. Some have seen increased productivity, others have actually had quite a bit of disruption. And initially, there was probably a little bit of, wow, we can do this, we're managing it, we're surviving, and we very quickly got on with it in terms of business continuity. And I think most of our clients and most industries have responded pretty well if they've been able to sustain their work. However, as this reality and this extended lockdown and repeated lockdowns has continued, there has been some thinking that, wow, there are challenges. It's not all easy, and we are going to have to really start changing and making some fundamental changes. And I think for me, that's where our A3 kind of thinking comes in, that adapt, adopt, and accelerate. And so for us, there are kind of 5 areas. The first is really thinking about your business strategy and operating model. Where is the focus? How is that changing? And how do we shift and organize ourselves differently? The second is really around risk. We have to start rethinking our risk and how we apply risk. We've been hit with an impact on our risk processes through this pandemic, but that's had a ripple effect in terms of multiple new risks that have been introduced. Just a small thing, people moving off-site. What do we do around data security, health and safety? Key things that we hadn't had to consider before suddenly become quite critical. And then it's been around the real estate. Many of our clients have got big offices, big spaces where people would spend time and go to work. Now, we're not sure what we're going to do with those spaces. Do we need them? Do they need to evolve? And so there's a big shift around what the office is going to be in the future. Our people practices, how we manage performance, how we connect with people. This whole idea about when somebody's at work, they're working. Now we have to change our mindset. Actually, when somebody's not at work, they're working. And I think that's created a whole set of new opportunities around how we manage our talent, how we manage our people, how we keep people engaged. And in fact, we've seen an increase in that focus on humanization and connection and engagement. Perhaps it's had the most focus because we've moved away from work-life balance into this new idea of work-life integration. So how do we create people policies and practices that really support that? And then finally, we've started to look at the kind of practical things around the legal and tax implications, because those are often the barriers that limit us from making a shift. Our employment contracts aren't designed for this new reality. Our business policies are not designed for this new reality. In fact, often public policies and government policies aren't aligned to that. And we're starting to see a big shift not only in the public domain, in business domain around our legal policies, procedures. And in that is this idea around mobility, because more and more there is a pressure on our teams that deal with mobility to start rethinking around how they enable that in different locations, different geographies, different countries, a big shift. So this multidisciplinary team and the panel that we're going to introduce you to in a moment, we will talk you through each one of those dimensions in terms of how we seeing the shifts in our clients, what are the things that they're starting to do to evolve that, and finally then we're also going to look at it by industry, because obviously every industry has got a different set of realities. A mining operation might be very different to a bank, a telecoms client very different to a public sector client, in terms of what you are dealing with as an organization. Or often our consumer and our retail clients are really shifting significantly in an area that's being heavily disrupted in terms of how people engage and consume their services and products. So an exciting, challenging, and often daunting experience in working in this space, but for us been an awesome opportunity to really learn and grow and navigate it. And I think what we've created is we can't always predict with certainty what the future will be. However, with a framework, with the right deliberation, with the right ability and capacity to step back and start making some very strategic and deliberate choices, we do have the potential to start navigating this differently and getting to a better outcome that hopefully will deliver a more sustainable business that's positioned to thrive. In looking and thinking through the different disciplines that we've been engaging with, the first area that really we've focused on is the strategy and operating model. And with me here is Daryl Elliott, who is part of our strategy practice and leads our cost optimization and has been working with us on this A3 solution as we help clients and work with clients to navigate this new reality. So Daryl, I think many leaders have had their worlds turned upside down. And quite practically, often of them, you're moving now into a space where it's gone beyond choosing whether you're going to wear your gym clothes or your pajamas in the day, into far more significant strategic choices around how they shape their businesses and respond. What do you see as some of the key challenges business leaders face in responding and shaping their strategy in quite an uncertain and dynamically changing environment?
Thanks, John. You're right, things have certainly changed. I think today's the first time I've worn a suit in about 6 months. But COVID has done that. COVID has disrupted the way that we do things. It's disrupted the way that our customers work, and it's disrupted the way that we engage with our customers. And yet to just make some decisions around how we engage without actually fundamentally assessing your fundamentals as a business and whether those have shifted is a missed opportunity. So really organizations should be thinking through making deliberate choices. Strategies about making deliberate choices. You can either let the circumstances happen to you, or you can deliberately choose how to adapt to them. So there's many challenges that organizations are dealing with at the moment, not least of which the dress code. But certainly two of the more strategic ones in my view is firstly the business portfolio of an organization and whether that portfolio is still fit for purpose. Is it going to allow you to achieve your strategic aspirations, given the changes in the market, given the rapid acceleration of digital channels and technology in the way in which we engage now? So business portfolio is the first key strategic decision and choice. And then linked to that is your business configured in such a way that you are still enabled to be successful in this post-COVID environment? And that means taking a deliberate view of what are the most strategic capabilities that you need now that will allow you to invest in the right places, to manage your business and manage business performance and actually build resilience in your organization for an uncertain future.
And I think what I'm hearing is that there actually is a shift to making some very deliberate choices. It seems though there's a lot of pressure on leaders. Do you think there's enough space and time being made to actually think through these strategic choices?
I'm not convinced there is. I think many leaders have had to respond very quickly to manage their businesses through a crisis. And that means making working capital decisions, liquidity decisions, managing cash flow and ensuring that you are actually in a position to respond to the crisis. And sure, that is and was the priority, but I think things have now shifted. And are leaders actually spending enough time thinking about the future that they're now going to land in and being deliberate about making sure that they get to that future and are successful in that future? I don't think so. I think they can spend a bit more time thinking through the strategic decisions really that are now founded on a changing scenario.
You mentioned shifting the way you configured and the operating model. If you look at that, what are kind of the biggest impacts you're seeing on the operating model?
Well, I think it really comes down to what capabilities you need to be successful in achieving your strategy. And an operating model, simply put, is the configuration of capabilities to enable you to achieve that strategic intent. So the question really becomes, what are those strategic capabilities that you need? Especially with the rise of digital and the rise of digital engagement channels, access to capabilities is now shifted. You don't need to get capabilities in the city or the town or even the country that you operate in. In fact, capabilities are globally accessible. So what does that mean for your operating model? It means that maybe your operating model, the way it was designed in the parameters of the physical world from 10 months ago even, maybe some of those design choices are no longer valid, and really should have a look at how you can do it more efficiently in a now more global environment.
Because it's interesting for me, I think a lot of us kind of quite quickly, we packed up, we took our laptops, went and worked at home. But I suppose, what does that mean in terms of the opportunities it's creating and how we want to configure ourselves going forward, right? Does it change the way we work, who does that work? And I think for us, that's very important from a future of work perspective. But if you were going to start looking at where you think the biggest opportunities are for organizations, to either optimize or to try to accelerate their digital future, what do you think those are?
So I think it is somewhat industry dependent. There are some industries that are very physically bounded. And yet even in those industries, like tech mining, for example, where you are at an operation and you're at a production site, there are many roles and activities and capabilities around that you no longer need on site. And if it means optimization of your back office, rationalization of your physical infrastructure around where people are actually sitting, there's big opportunities to look at optimizing your cost base. And certainly access to those capabilities is now, as I said, much broader or much more open in terms of getting those capabilities from wherever you need them. We had some examples of organizations who 10 months ago were making decisions around whether they should put a sales force, for example, in a particular geography close to that customer environment, but yet they were still selling product over the 6 months during COVID in a virtual way. So that decision actually needs to be tested. And certainly that has implications on your cost structures and how you manage that workforce.
And it's interesting that you mentioned mining, because I think that's also mirrors my experience. A very 20th century, 19th century business model that I've actually noticed have been sometimes the leaders in adopting these new technologies and really adapting the way they work. We would have assumed that sort of happens in your banking, your financial services environments more, or your consumer clients. But interesting dichotomy, actually. Daryl, any last words of advice in terms of, here you're a leader and you've got to start this journey?
Yeah, I think lastly, just we've seen the rapid acceleration of digital technology and capabilities and platforms through this process. I think if you're not thinking about how you build that capability inside your organization and what it means for you, whether it's around how you manage your back office or how you manage the way in which you engage with your customers, I think you're missing an opportunity. So that's something that really requires focus at this point in time.
Thanks very much. The next person on the panel I'd like to introduce and get to share their point of view is Ichne Gray. Ichne is a director in our risk advisory business. And you've been doing a lot of work with clients as they've kind of navigated the new risks and challenges that they've faced. What are some of those critical risks, Ichne, that you've seen clients dealing with?
No, thank you, John. Yes, certainly. I think COVID-19, like for many things in business and global economies, has certainly also affected the risk management space within a business. COVID being one and the pandemic being one of the biggest risks and challenges I think we have faced to date. So I think, what it has done for risk management functions is it's actually confirmed the productive status of risk management functions. What that means is that if you look at the performance of a risk management function in the best global organizations, they are identifying risks, they have established programs, they have established methodologies. However, they report on those identified risks, the known, in other words, they report on those known risks. What has been lagging behind is the high impact, low probability risks, the view of that to management. And I think many of the organizations do not actively pursue that angle within their risk management activity. Risk management really having a bit of a narrow view when it comes to their risk management frameworks at the same point in time. So not looking at those high impact, low probability risks actually leaves a gap and an exposure to the organization as well. The two other items I'd just like to mention is the one is that there's a bit of a lack of an appreciation of what the true value of risk management should be at an organization. Remembering also over the past decades, the business complexity has increased substantially. COVID just placed another emphasis, another lens on that as well. There's no more risk management as usual, like there's no more business as usual, workplace as usual. So the same for risk management, this put a completely different pressure on risk management functions. Even the best well-established ones will have to rethink their methodologies of how they actually manage risk going forward in a very, very uncertain future. In essence, in summary, what we see is it's effectively, risk management functions were doing great. However, they were applying 20th century type of risk approaches to very complex 21st century risk experiences. And that left a bit of an exposure for the business as a whole.
I really like that thinking around the low probability, high impact risk, right? And how that's kind of jumped up. And I think the pandemic is one of those, right? It was probably low probability, but massive impact and a ripple impact. Yeah. What are some of the key risks that you see clients having to manage differently and applying a different set of risk methodologies and approaches?
Yeah, I think, John, so, there's if you look at the broader economy, I think there's a lot of economical risk at this point in time. Leaders having to step up, ensure the revenue growth is there, the profitability growth is there. They have to redeploy assets. I think Mark has spoken very fluently around the physical infrastructure of organizations being one of the biggest charges and costs to the income statement. However, I think the opportunity for risk management, it has to be forced. Whilst you will be reviewing some of your business strategies, you have to, in line with that, remember about the risk assessment and risk management practices. Every strategic choice that leaders would now be taking within the business and new efforts and new directions they'll be exploring and unpacking has a risk conversation. So how are we going to work in the future, where we're going to invest our money, how are we going to preserve current value of the business, how are we going to grow next value in the business, actually has a risk conversation in every single theme that management will be exploring for the future. And risk management functions as that challenge. They have to step up to that conversation. They can't come afterwards and say, but we are exposed here, there and that. They have to be a catalyst for change from a risk perspective with management as a first line of defense. And that requires a solid and integrated risk management methodology. We see what happens now is that the business as usual type of risk practices, there are blurred lines now between that crisis management and business continuity, because it builds better resilience for the business itself. So I think there's a fast track opportunity for leaders with risk management. They have to be at the table, they have to participate in the conversation to produce stakeholder value. Remember, your stakeholders, they expect management to manage the risks. Can't be left.
Thank you, Igna. What I really notice in listening to you is that there's two kind of key things that have to shift, right? One, risk is going to have to be a lot more proactive. And two, if it's not integrated into the strategic decisions that they're making as a business, you're going to miss a trick.
Absolutely, yes. You might be creating a new set of risks for the organization.
Right, hi Angelique. I'd like to kind of hand my next question to you, Angelique. Angelique looks after GAS for Africa, which is Global Employee Services, and I mean your team does a lot of support for mobility teams, which I think has become a big thing with this advent of new contracting models and people working in different spaces. What are some of the big challenges that you've seen from clients?
So the biggest challenges mobility has seen is where and when people are working and how they are working. Companies now need to decide whether remote working is actually going to form part of their go-forward workforce strategy, whether in the short, medium or long term. In a recent global study, 85% of companies have indicated that they will continue with remote working into the long term. Mobility's really had to deal with domestic and international remote workers. What this really means, and by the way, this applies to both existing and new hires. What this means is that you've got staff that are either working within the same country, but potentially working in a different state or a different province. In even a more radical kind of thing, people may even be working in different geographies. So for example, you could have somebody who is working in the Johannesburg office now living and working in the Eastern Cape, but still working for the office in Johannesburg. Or a UK national who may have been on assignment to Botswana, now living and working in the UK, but continuing to work for the Botswana entity. Overlaid on that is mobility's had to deal with virtual assignments. This is where people have been sent on assignment but have not actually physically left their home city or country, and they work remotely for the company to which they would normally have physically been sent. So those are quite big challenges that they're facing. Clients are also grappling with technology. They may not have the necessary platforms to actually manage their remote workforce, and a lot of leaders are not necessarily understanding the opportunities that are presenting themselves as a result of remote working. So they see the tax complications, they see the administrative complications, and they start shutting down the remote work discussion, which really just stifles the organization's ability to grow. As a result of displaced workers, we're also seeing that companies are having to grapple with tax risk management, with payroll and reporting requirements, with the shifting tax responsibility, as well as having to actually make corrections in different jurisdictions as a result of these displaced workers.
It's interesting because I think this whole idea that you can now work remotely and that's become a reality, it's opened up a whole different set of talent models and talent opportunities. I think that's the one point I'm hearing from you. But I also hear with that there's a whole lot of complexity in solving a very simple thing like I want to work for the Botswana company but live in the UK. What kinds of things are clients having to deal with, and what would you advise them to do in terms of solving that?
So it really is a complex landscape and fraught with landmines, I'm afraid to say. You have to take so many considerations into account. You have to look at the person's resident status, how long they've been in each of the jurisdictions, with what level of employee they are. Could they be creating a permanent establishment for your entity? Are they at a job level that can or cannot work remotely? So really there are a lot of items that you potentially have to be considering. None of them are insurmountable, but they all do have to be considered.
And I suppose that needs deliberate focus, right?
Correct.
So if, in terms of the teams, what would you say the future of mobility is?
It's exciting, it's complex, but as I said, it's a whole new way of looking at things, and you'd have to really be looking at your policies, your procedures, your technology around how to support this new workforce of yours.
Thanks very much, Angelique. So the next person I'd like to kind of talk to you about is Marco Macaniano. He's a doctor of architecture, works in our smart real estate practice, in fact leads our smart real estate practice in our core business operations team. Marco, I don't think you've been busier than since this pandemic as people have had to rethink their real estate and their office space. What are some of the challenges that you've seen with clients and the shifts?
Absolutely. I think everybody's affected by this, and no more so than in the real estate environment or the real estate sector. Many businesses are actually asking themselves, do we still require the same amount of space that we had before? Is our workplace still the optimum investment of money and time that it once was, given that work from home has been so disruptive to our practices? And really that's where the crux of what we offer focuses on. It's understanding or helping understand businesses what constitutes a best fit work environment according to the type of work and the type of evolution that the work has undergone in these recent times. So one of the biggest issues that we're finding with our clients is to really come to terms with how much space do I actually need and what does this space need to become. It's an incredibly important question to have answered because it affects typically the bottom line beyond bar none. I think it's the second highest item on any major company's P&L as their real estate. So what we want to make sure that we're helping our clients get to grips with is how to actually attack this problem piece by piece. Because I think in the industry there's been a general knee-jerk reaction to try and answer this with bits of tech. And the real risk around that is that you can actually incur a lot of unnecessary expense and actually fragment your problem worse than ever before. So what we're saying to our clients is don't fall into the trap of trying to buy pockets of solutions to try and solve what is a big fundamentally organizational-wide problem, but rather don't take a tech-led solution, but let's rather take a human-centric based approach to understand what we need to do to create environments, workplaces that are supportive of ways of work, supportive of new activities, and supportive of this new evolution so that the workplace becomes a tool of the business. So that would be my recommendation.
And I think that's very good advice in terms of not being knee-jerk, but actually starting to focus on what that whole organizational change needs to be in transformation, right? And thinking about a more human space as a trend. So if you were to sort of zone in and say to a client, what exactly should they be doing right now to kind of make sure that they make the right choices?
Well, I think we need to ask our clients to, be aware of what is it they're trying to achieve. And really what they're trying to do is to make sure that they're getting better benefits out of their staff through productivity, which impacts their bottom line. They want to be more healthy businesses. So the workplace, effectively as an office, needs to support that agenda. It's not just a place to go to work, but it becomes a space to enable better ways of work. If I go to the office, it's because I can be enabled to do my job there better than anywhere else. So this home field advantage, right? So effectively what it's becoming is a support system that says, as an employee, when I come to the office, I'm enabled to do my job better than ever before because I'm in a highly engineered environment. It allows me to work faster, more efficient, have the connections I need, get access to services, amenities, and spaces, and other colleagues when I need it. The workplace actually reaches in and helps answer those questions when we need them. So effectively what we're saying is that this idea around the workplace as a tool for business is serving the same role as if we were to spend the same amount of money on installing new software to get 10% of extra productivity out of a workforce. The workplace can actually deliver on that in a compound effect. It also means, of course, that businesses need to have the data and the information and the knowledge at their disposal to know when to shrink or contract or to grow and expand, because it's about serving their benefit or serving their interests from understanding what activities they're trying to support, what outputs they're trying to create, and what exactly constitutes a unique and elevated employee experience.
I think we've got to capture that. I really like that statement. The workplace is no longer a place we go to work. I think that's really an antiquated idea, right?
It is.
Just because I'm at work, I'm working. That's not necessarily true. And what I'm hearing you say is actually this is a space which is designed for me to do certain things more productively.
Exactly. A space designed to make me, to enable me to work better than ever before, according to the type of activity I'm trying to get. We can't force a round peg into a square hole here. Let's be factual about what kind of work we're trying to support, and then specifically engineer our environment to support that. But of course, that can only be possible if we think about our workplace as a living, breathing system, something that is connected to the way that we're working, that is capable of delivering and creating data according to workplace activities on an ongoing basis so that we can test, we can choreograph, we can fine-tune activities on a day-to-day basis so that these environments can continually improve over time. The workplace isn't just a fixed product or a space we occupy, but an enabling environment that supports us. And just as we change, so too should the workplace with the right systems approach.
So just as a last thought, and since you're the real estate guy, what is the future of the office?
I think the future of the office is hybrid. Certainly days of 9 to 5 within a fixed environment, I don't see them coming back ever. The future of the office is effectively going to be fine-tuned to our needs when we need them. Just like a good suit might breathe and shrink as we breathe during the day, or maybe put on a few pounds or lose a few pounds. For me, the workplace is effectively going to be an environment that can contract and shrink with our organizations as they change. It's going to be a highly tech-enabled environment that is stitched into the way we want to work. It's going to be activities-focused and outcomes-focused rather than just square meterage and time-focused. Let's make sure that this becomes an enabling environment that is fine-tuned to performance.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Marco.
Thank you.
So the next person I'd like to go to is Anastasia Pozakov. Anastasia is in our legal practice and has been working a lot with clients as they start to reshape and rethink through their legal policies. Anastasia, what challenges are you seeing with clients as they navigate this new reality?
Well, John, the COVID-19 and national lockdown forced many employers to face the dreaded remote management of staff. Overnight, employers who traditionally managed performance and implemented discipline within the office had to learn how to do so remotely. This included managing working hours and time off, providing necessary home office equipment, and establishing connectivity, all within the confines of long-established and often codified human resource policies, which never anticipated a global pandemic and nationwide lockdown. And as employers have been forced into this new way of working, many have realized that their workforce structure is too rigid or too bloated, and as a result, and in many cases due to the damaging financial impact of the pandemic, many employers have had to restructure their operations and their workforce in order to create efficiency and cost effectiveness.
And I like to, so you kind of highlight two things, right? One is the kind of inefficiency kind of conversation around your workforce, and the other is around the rigidity of how we've potentially contracted or arranged those working relationships. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about how is that shifting in terms of the way we might contract with people going forward?
Well, John, I think we can anticipate many more local as well as global disruptive events to our traditional way of doing work. And as a result, I think it's going to be necessary for employers to recategorize the way that they engage staff, for example, employee to contractor or gig worker, in order to meet the operational requirements of the business as well as take into account the economic interests of the worker.
And if you were going to give some advice to clients in terms of how they should be approaching this and rethinking the way they reshape many of their policies?
Yes, so definitely you need to review your employment contracts, you need to review your human resource policies and procedures in order to anticipate disruptive events, as well as accommodate remote work as well as varied working hours.
And I think what's interesting for me, Anastasia, is that actually this is often where this lovely idea about moving remotely and we're going to have a different way of working comes apart, right? When you actually get down to the nitty-gritty of having to look at the fine print. What kind of capacity and time do you think it's going to take before we start seeing that it become more of a permanent feature?
Well, we're already seeing it. A lot of employers are contacting us to advise on how do we change the policies and procedures, how do we provide clauses in employment contracts, in independent contractor agreements that provide for these unexpected events, for the requirement to maybe work from the office one day and then work from home the other day. So it's already coming in. I think that the pandemic and the lockdown has escalated and forced employers to think around their remotely working staff, around their shifting the structure of their workforce a lot quicker than they would have maybe thought about it before.
So Anastasia, just as last, thank you very much. Is any advice you'd like to give clients in terms of the best way to approach this reshaping and recontracting?
Well, certainly the one piece of advice is it's necessary to communicate with your staff. It is important that as you do effect changes, you do so having a mindset that you need to negotiate this with your employees. So for example, your KPIs may need to be reconsidered. How are you going to measure productivity and performance where your employees are no longer working a traditional 9 to 5 in the office? You need to also consider your occupational health and safety requirements. What are your obligations as an employer where the workspace has shifted from your office to your employee's home? And then obviously if you have any abuses of this new way of work, you need to ensure that you address them quickly and appropriately. So for example, if you have staff that are working from home but you're not able to access them, or you have suspicions that maybe they're abusing the time at home, you do need to address that quickly.
Are there potential increase or different types of abuses that you're starting to see coming through?
Well, I think the main issue is traditionally employers are used to seeing their staff physically in the office, and they can monitor both their behavior as well as their productivity. And now I think employers are having to create a bit more trust with their staff to make sure that as long as the product is being delivered when it should be, that how the employee maybe manages their time, their coffee breaks, their lunch hours, all of those things, that they trust their employees to do so. But that really is the main issue at the moment. Also, of course, with restructuring and discipline, how do you conduct that when someone is not physically in the office? And a lot of the queries have been around conducting disciplinary inquiries, having consultation processes around retrenchments and restructurings, all while doing it via Zoom or Skype, and making sure that you still follow the legal process, even though it's taken a different format.
So thank you very much, Anastasia. I think just in closing, if I'm hearing what you're saying, there's kind of a balance. Employees need to think about the contract on two levels. One, they need to communicate and engage with their people and teams to kind of humanize that experience and build a different level and a new type of trust as they manage this new reality. And secondly, they've got to spend time really thinking through some of the practical policies and how they apply those and how they evolve those to match a more potentially flexible way of engaging and working with people. Thank you very much. Yeah, so next, really nice to have Talita. Talita Muller is a program manager in our Future of Work team for the Africa practice. She's been a part of the Future of Work global practice for the last 2 and a bit years. Talita, I think, from something that was often quite conceptual, you're now finding yourself more in demand than ever, busier than ever. What are some of the shifts that you're seeing in terms of why clients are engaging so quickly with this Future of Work?
Well, thanks, John. And I think for the most part, the Future of Work initiatives that we have been talking to clients about, and the type of questions that people have been asking, it was quite tactical in nature. Often over-focus on the new skills or on technology implementation or limited incremental new ways of working. But with the forced lockdown, it was almost like an accelerated wake-up call to really now think about what does it mean to work, to conduct work, where should the work be done, and who should be doing the work. And the organizations that have been exploring these principles for quite some time, we saw them actually responding much quicker to the forced lockdown. They were able to adjust their ways of working quite quickly. But whether or not you have been exploring these initiatives or not, never before have there been such a focus such as now to fundamentally take this as a strategic lens to rethink not just the new skills of tomorrow, but from the business strategy to the business model, the operating model, where the work will be done, by who it will be done, the type of talent strategies, the type of leadership practices, all in all, a fundamental restart and a rethink.
Thanks, Talita. I think that's really kind of insightful in terms of the challenges. If you think about organizations going forward, obviously they're making some deliberate choices. Where do you think they should be focusing in terms of making the shift?
Before you go into the type of skill that I need and the way in which we're going to work, you have to start with what is the work that people will do. I've heard some of the other panel members talking about it this morning already, that our very definition of work, the time where work takes place and when, the Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 notion, those are done, those days are gone. We're no longer living in that time because now work can be done from almost anywhere, anytime. So where clients should be focusing is to say, how do we shift the work and our definition of work to enable more humanized and meaningful work, not just through technology implementations for efficiency, but true human-machine collaboration to unlock the efficiencies from both the machines and the potential that lies within the humans. And talking about the humans, it's also how should you be shifting your definition of a workforce so that you can tap into multiple employment models, from the full-time permanent staff to your contract workers and your freelancers, and as we've also heard, the workers that are not necessarily within your jurisdiction, but the talent that are sitting in different parts of the world. And that then brings us to the third shift, which is around the workplace and where work should be done. And not just where it should be done, but where it can be done, and in that way enabling the phygital world, the physical and the digital world of work, and really challenging what you think the office of tomorrow will look like.
So you used this word humans, right? And I suppose that's deliberate. So, and I think it's come up a few times in the conversation thus far. But you're a leader, and we've moved into a kind of a new shift where people are working digitally a lot more, potentially are not directly connected. What is your advice or thinking around how one can humanize the workplace going forward? Or is that becoming less important?
I know that's in actual fact becoming the most important thing. And one of the key things to do that is to be very deliberate about the new rules of business. And in being deliberate, it's to start with re-architecting work. And what we mean by re-architecting work is to really put front and center in mind what is the value that you want to deliver and drive, either to your internal customers within the business or to your external customers. And when you have that focus of value, what are the things driving the value, then to architect the work around the outcomes that need to be achieved. And why that is so important, and this is probably the topic and future of work that gets me the most excited, is when you really focus on the value that you need to drive and the work outcomes to achieve that. That gives you the opportunity to really fundamentally challenge your thinking about the work to be done by the humans and the work that can be done by the machines. I always say that we forget that we designed the organizations we live in today. We designed it as humans, and we designed the processes and the jobs that we follow today. And for a lot of for those jobs and processes, we've been following the same ones since a time that the technologies we have today didn't exist. And now we're at that point in time where we have the technologies that can do the work. Why not let the technologies do the work that they can do, and let the humans do the human-natured work? Let the humans be truly focusing on the meaning and the value that they can drive and add.
I'd like to just close off on that, because I think that was a great point that you picked up there, right? You start off by saying that ultimately it's the work that changes. And I think when you talk about work outcomes, you also talk about the value that you create through the work, right? So by starting with what value you create, and then how do you work to create that value, there's a big opportunity to rethink and reshape our organizations. So thank you very much, Talita.
Thanks, John.
Our next person I'd like to get input from is Jill Hofmeyer. Jill Hofmeyer is a leader in our TMT, which stands for Telecommunications, Media and Technology Industry. Jill, what are the key shifts you're seeing for clients in your industry?
I think they come from two sources, all COVID inspired, but the first is obviously the fundamental shift in the products and services that consumers need. Obviously, as people have moved to working at home, staying at home more, the impact for TMT in terms of connectivity to the home for business services, enhanced streaming of entertainment. And so that's fundamentally changed the products and services they're providing. The second one that I think is really sort of top of mind right now is the impact that it has had and will continue to have on internal operations. So there are a lot of choices that are now set up around workforces, operational staff, that have been virtualized during COVID. Can I keep them virtualized as a new better? So for instance, field service technicians, there's no need for them to go to the office to pick up a brief and a schedule. Let them be virtual. Contact center staff. So that is a deliberate strategy we're seeing our clients deploy, setting up that new better around virtualized workforces. Obviously enabled by technology, not only to give them the tools of the trade, but also so that they remain connected and engaged to their organizations and their teams.
So it sounds like a big shift to working remotely, and it sounds like that's been adopted quite quickly and being implemented quite effectively. If you think about the skills, how do you see the skills shifting, particularly when you mentioned that obviously a much more digitized engagement with customers, there's a big shift there. What are the new skills?
So there's no doubt that COVID has accelerated TMT operators' digital migrations, their migrations to the cloud. So there's some big skill shifts. Obviously, DevOps is top of mind, and a lot of work going on around how do we deploy, build that DevOps capability and ways of work. Another one I'm seeing a lot of is a different skill base in relating to our client service providers. In a cloud world, quite a lot of my operations as an operator move into the cloud in terms of maintenance and support under the mandate of my clients, my cloud service partner. So it is critical that relationship is a strategic one, not just a kind of a vendor transactional one. So those would be some of the key things. I think perhaps the third one would be more of a ways of work one. Certainly to be successful, these new skills need to be deployed and applied across the value chain. So it's technology, it's the consumer functions, it's the back office. And we're seeing a much more important need for interlock between those areas. I'll give you an example. With all these new technologies, how do we commercialize those technologies? How do we make money? So very tight interlock, for instance, between finance and technology around the monetization of APIs.
It sounds like a lot more integration across the different functions. So those skill sets moving and become more multi-skilled. Would that be fair?
Absolutely correct. Yeah, that's what we're seeing.
So if you had to move and give a leader in the telecommunications space and media and technology, what would the advice be that you'd give them right now?
I would say that you need to kind of set up 2 heat maps in your head, or on even better on a little bit of a spreadsheet. And the first would be around virtualization opportunities. What segments, is it a new better, not only for the organization, but also for customers and for employees themselves to work remotely in a deliberate manner. So the virtualization heat map, and then the skills heat map, so where are the sort of red hot critical skills I need to rapidly rebuild to enable success. So being deliberate about those kind of 2 heat maps, and then of course managing towards them.
Do you think that leaders are dealing with this change effectively?
I see different responses. My observation, it was interesting, Darryl saying earlier that he feels that quite a lot of organizations have sort of perhaps not been as deliberate as they can be. It's my experience, and maybe it's a high-tech thing, but it's my experience that a lot of the TMT operators are moving very quickly to capitalize and see the opportunity in this new better, rather than kind of react in a firefighting way.
And thank you, Jill. I really like the way you framed that, the new better, right? In terms of a more efficient, effective, virtualized, cloud-based way of working. Thank you.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
So next up, Trevor Page, who is a director in our human capital business and also a leader in our financial services industry. Trevor, you spend a lot of your time working with our financial services clients, and you spend a lot of the time in the last 6 months working with our financial services clients, delivering on multiple projects. What are some of the challenges that you are seeing they're facing, and how they're responding to that?
I think generally in the financial services industry, they're coping with a number of things at once. So they're coping with the pandemic and the fallout from that in terms of their cost base, in terms of their customer base, in terms of trying to maintain operations while working virtually, and having a lot of people off working virtually. So coupled to that, they're facing disruption already pre-COVID in terms of new fintechs that are coming into their market with better products or smarter products delivered at a cheaper cost base. So they almost had these 2 waves hitting them at the same time, and they're having to deal with both of those together. And a third wave is changing customer patterns as a result now of people who are not living the same life as they lived before. So financial services, in terms of banks and insurance companies, are having to now adjust for those 3 waves in quite a fast manner in order to maintain operations, but also to speed up their ability to keep growing market share and to retain profitability.
And if you were thinking about how they're navigating this, what advice would you give?
They're navigating it by investing hugely in new technologies. They're on a bit of a catch-up mode, but they're doing very well. They're investing hugely in that. And that comes with a whole new set of skills that are required in those companies. So not transactional skills anymore, but skills related to the enhancement and adoption and development of new technologies, like their disruptors. So I think Jill mentioned the issue around DevOps and the ability to work in teams, the ability to be fast and flexible. And banks are having to reorganize themselves to be more like the fintech disruptors than the standard old banks that they used to be. And that requires new skills, it requires retraining, it requires a whole new talent base and a whole new way of looking for talent in the context of the new technologies and new marketplace that they have to serve. The advice would be, speed up, because that you don't have a lot of time, and speed up in terms of creating a more team-based environment. Look at a much greater focus on customer than you've had before, and look for particular skills that relate to the platforms, the technologies, and the customer's service that you want to provide versus the skills that you have in the organization at the moment.
Thanks, Trevor, and that's really insightful. And I suppose just a last question is, you talked about the 3 waves and the massive disruption and the shift in skills and the shift in ways of working. If you are talking to a leader in financial services today, what would you say to them is, where's the place to start this? What should they be doing now, practically?
I think they have started, and the place to start is to understand from a technology perspective, what are we using, what are we implementing, and then what do we need in order to do that in a very focused way. Because large projects to transform systems and legacy systems is going to be too slow. So the big advice that we are giving our clients at the moment, but that I would give to your question, would be to look at the partnerships that you can form immediately for speed. So ecosystem partnerships with fintechs, with new players, with your own disruptors, across your whole banking and insurance value chain, and to speed up those conversations and start with some of those already, so that you're not investing yourself in all this all the time and increasing your cost, and having to bring in those skills and trying to find those scarce skills out in a COVID-ravaged workplace, but to go and forge those partnerships, small ones at first, focused ones at first, where you can immediately and quickly see results based on the different platforms and the different technologies that you want to use for the future.
And it really resonates very nicely if I listen to the 3 things that you're highlighting. It's that collaboration with partners, creating some speed, and being very clear where you want to focus. And I think that for me is quite critical.
Yes, indeed. I mean, focus, collaboration, very important, and then decision making. Leadership is about decision making, and it's making the right decisions and making them fast, because post COVID, we're going to be in a highly competitive world, in terms of markets, in terms of product, in terms of the customer that we have, in terms of the whole new ways of working. And those that are focused and can make the decisions fast and can collaborate across these ecosystems and partnerships will be ahead of the game.
Thank you, Trevor. So we're going to go across to Fortune in the Western Cape. Fortune looks after our human capital team there and is also part of our future of work practice. Fortune's been doing a lot of engaging with clients in the last 6 months. Fortune, really, I'd like to hear from you. What has the impact of the pandemic been on your clients and how they've had to adapt to this future of work?
Yeah, thank you, John. So certainly I think that I would like to focus on particularly the consumer services clients who have naturally fallen under the essential services. And so the impact on them was that they obviously had to continue with value generation, because they obviously had to feed all of us and ensure that we've got our food security. So one of the key things that has been at the top of their minds is continuing with operation and production. So they've had to think really quickly around how they continue to operate, given the new way of working, where they obviously had to think of, previously an environment would have catered for 100% of their staff complement. Now, obviously, with the new regulations, it's now catering for 33%, but they still want to be operating at the capacity of 100%. So they've really had to think creatively around their workplace and how they ensure that they continue to produce at optimum levels with the constrained workforce or real estate.
Great. And if you had to give them a kind of key piece of advice in terms of how they should be continuing to adapt and really maybe potentially taking the opportunity to make some key changes to their businesses, what would that be?
That's a great question, John, because I'm actually reminded of one of the leaders of digital in one of our consumer clients. He said, Fortune, I've battled with this idea of a digital strategy and a business strategy, and I have come to realize that actually what it should be, it's a business strategy that is informed by digital. So I think that now more than ever, the digital transformation of consumer services clients has been put at the forefront so that the technology is enabling more effective and optimized processes. But what that has required, it has required that they change their ways of work. There's a colleague of ours who always says that it's not only about switching on the tech, but it's really about how do we enhance the way of working of the employees who are going to work on these new processes so that they're able to so the organization is able to leverage value from this new way of working and from this digital transformation. But also the consumer at the end actually needs to experience an elevated customer experience. So if there's one piece of advice is that they integrate their digital transformation into their business strategy rather than having two separate strategies.
Awesome, thanks Fortune, that's great insights and thanks for sharing. So we're going to cross over to KwaZulu-Natal to my colleague Stembiso Pagadi, who is a director in our human capital business and also a leader in our energy and resources industry. Stembiso, I think this has been an industry that's been very interesting to kind of work through in the pandemic. What are some of the challenges you've seen faced by our energy and resources clients?
Thank you, John. Yes, this industry, especially mining sector, has been hit heavily during the pandemic because during lockdown, they were not allowed to work, especially as you can imagine, about 60% to 65% of the workforce in the center is in the production space. So they're not working in the office. So the production had to be halted. So we are also observing other trends in the sector where actually work is being redefined and then the companies are actually thinking about new skills that are being cultivated. We are also seeing a big shift in the sector in terms of what types of work will be continued to be done by humans versus those that can be done by machines. But also they are trying to take advantage of the process automation as well as mechanization that is happening in the mines. More mining businesses are starting to leverage also on different types of cognitive and AI technology to augment their workforces. So this is meaning they need to think very carefully about how they go about deciding which workers need to return to work, especially during this time as they try to reboot and think about returning to work.
So it sounds like quite a lot of change. If you kind of had to see where the focus has been and where you think clients should be focusing in your industry, where do you think that focus should be?
I think, John, our mining clients are beginning to focus on really understanding, because of the pandemic and because of the way work is changing itself, they're trying to decide which roles are going to return and by when, and also they're trying to think about new roles that are emerging, such as data scientists and those kinds of jobs that are going to have a very good blend of technical skill as well as human skills, so to speak. So that's been their challenge. But also, as you might imagine, safety and productivity in the mining sector are very, very key. So they're trying, while they're looking at the different ways of working, but they're also trying to maintain their safety records and also making sure that people continue to work in a collaborative manner with technology and AI, especially in the mining operations.
So if you were kind of looking at leaders that are now leading organizations and leading teams in the mining sector and the resources sector, what do you think you would say to them in terms of where they should start this journey or what they should be focusing on now?
Yeah, you see, when I speak to my clients, John, in this sector, leaders, you see, in this sector, leaders and line managers like to supervise, and what I refer to as the over-the-shoulder supervision. And now they're struggling to try and understand how can we actually continue leading teams in a virtual fashion, especially those that are in corporate centers or head offices. So what we find is that the way we measure work and the way we measure performance is starting to shift. So line leaders and line managers are beginning to look at work outcomes or business outcomes as opposed to tasks as well as activities. So we're seeing the change of how roles are designed, and also we are seeing how work and performance are being measured. So they are focusing more on work outcomes, and then the tasks as well as activities are basically the inputs. So that is a fundamental shift, because if you are obsessed as a line manager to following around people, watching them work, it's probably not going to work, because 50 or 30% of them are never going to come to work in any case, so they're going to work virtually. So that to me is a fundamental shift in this sector.
And it sounds like quite a big challenge going forward, Simbi. So if I think about the fact that your corporate center probably could work quite virtually, whereas you're going to have a different type of engagement in operations. Any thoughts around how these organizations are going to have to navigate those two very different realities?
Yeah, that's a big question, John, because, as I said, 25% of the workforce in this center is in corporate center, or corporate offices. And then what we are seeing now is that actually we've been advising them to think about moving into a hybrid format where they actually take some of the support functions closer to business, in such a way that they become business partners, but they're actually stuck with businesses in such a way that they actually move closer to the operations and they support the teams there, as opposed to working from the center. We are also seeing even those types of jobs, so what we call job sharing. So maybe 60% of the job will be support and 40% will be actually working in business. So that kind of hybrid setup is beginning to emerge as well.
So I am seeing that moving towards a hybrid for you is a key thing, and it will continue to be a reality. Okay, challenging times, but also very interesting times to work in a sector to work in, Stevie. Good, thank you.
Absolutely. I think the hybrid model or the hybrid kind of format is not an option for this sector, for that same reason that if the roles are just designed to support, but they are not actually getting used to supporting closer to the business, and then that's going to be a fundamental shift for these jobs. And as I say, new skills and capabilities are emerging so that they actually get to understand the operations. They don't just work far away from the actual site.
Great, thank you. Much closer to operations and building a new set of skills, particularly around digital and automation, driving a very different type of operation and productivity. Thank you, Mr. Mbiso.
Absolutely.
The biggest challenge within the public sector really was the virtual deployment of all their employees and adoption of new ways in terms of leading and managing within a virtual environment. If you think of the public sector, how it operates, usually the citizens go to their offices. So unlike in the private sector, where sometimes indeed people are used to working probably from home or from clients, for them it was completely a new thing that they had to look at and adopt and find ways to adopt quickly. Having said that, though, in terms of the trend, in terms of going forward, the adoption and the accelerator, the trend similarly to the private sector is the ability to be able to adopt a more flexible organization built around both the normal work teams and the mission-based teams to complement technology. For example, if you think about it, institutions like your CCMA had to optimally utilize the technology that has been utilized during the lockdown period to continue with the mediation and arbitration of employee matters, whilst affording those who do not have access to technology the opportunity still to have access to walk-in centers. And so that's the trend where we are seeing that they're trying to accelerate from infrastructure development, having their employees being able to have connectivity at home to allow such to be able to continue, the new ways of working to continue going forward. So that is more the key trends within the public sector.
With a framework, with the right deliberation, with the ability and capacity to step back and start making some very strategic and deliberate choices, we do have the potential to start navigating this differently and getting to a better outcome that hopefully will deliver a more sustainable business that's positioned to thrive.